After the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iran fell into a state of deep shock, like a body that had just undergone major surgery but had not yet recovered. The monarchy of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi collapsed, bringing down the entire structure of the old power system. Many loyal generals were arrested or forced into exile, leaving the Army, Air Force, and Navy, once trained and equipped to Western standards, without a stable foundation. The supply of spare parts and ammunition was cut off, leaving behind a military that still possessed modern weapons but lacked the ability to sustain combat operations. Inside the barracks, the number of new recruits grew rapidly, yet most were poorly trained, while the chain of command weakened under continuous purges. At the same time, the new leadership under Ayatollah Khomeini focused on consolidating a political and religious system rather than maintaining a professional military. Many officers were removed on suspicion of loyalty to the old regime, and those who remained often had no experience commanding large-scale warfare. As a result, Iran entered a period of instability not only in its political structure, but also in its military capability, all while facing internal turmoil and escalating tensions with the United States following the hostage crisis in Tehran. To the West, Saddam Hussein watched these developments with calculated intent. After consolidating power at home and eliminating internal rivals, he turned his attention to overturning the Algiers Agreement of 1975, which had forced Iraq to concede control of much of the Shatt al-Arab waterway to Iran. For Saddam, this was not only a territorial issue, but a humiliation that needed to be erased. He believed the newly formed Islamic Republic was weak, consumed by political instability, and incapable of mounting a rapid response to a sudden attack. Saddam's ambitions, however, went beyond reclaiming disputed territory. He sought to position Iraq as the new center of power in the Arab world, replacing Egypt after Cairo signed a peace treaty with Israel. Iran's oil-rich Khuzestan province, home to a significant Arab population, was seen as a key objective. Baghdad expected the region to collapse quickly or even welcome Iraqi forces as liberators. Throughout the summer of 1980, tensions along the more than 600-kilometer border steadily escalated. Small clashes soon turned into sustained artillery exchanges across border posts and villages. Iraqi helicopters repeatedly flew low over marshlands to strike Iranian positions, while reconnaissance revealed significant gaps in Iran's defensive lines. By early September, Baghdad formally announced the cancellation of the Algiers Agreement and accused Iran of violating sovereignty and fomenting unrest in southern Iraq. Behind these declarations stood a force already prepared for war. Roughly 12 divisions, hundreds of T-55 and T-62 tanks, and more than 200 combat aircraft, backed by financial support from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. In Baghdad's calculations, speed and surprise were decisive. If the attack came fast and with enough force, Iran would not have time to organize a response, and the war could be decided in a short and decisive campaign. On the night of September 21st into the early hours of September 22nd, 1980, Iraqi MiG-23 and Mirage F-1 squadrons departed from bases in Mosul, Nasiriyah, and Al-Qut under radio silence. As they approached the border, they flew low over the desert to evade radar, then climbed simultaneously to strike more than 20 Iranian air bases stretching from Tabriz to Bandar Abbas. The plan was modeled on the kind of preemptive strike Israel had carried out in 1967. However, due to rushed preparation and limited combat experience, many Iraqi pilots released their bombs inaccurately, hitting secondary runways instead of destroying aircraft shelters. Iranian radar quickly detected the incursions, and within 3 hours, F-4 Phantom and F-14 Tomcat fighters were airborne to respond. Later that same day, Iran launched Operation Kaman 99, sending dozens of aircraft deep into Iraqi airspace to strike bases at Kirkuk, Al-Rashid, and Habaniyah. The raids destroyed multiple Iraqi aircraft on the ground and ignited fuel depots. Later assessments showed that neither side achieved air superiority. The war would not be decided by a single, decisive blow. Immediately after the opening airstrikes, Iraqi ground forces advanced across the entire front. The 1st and 9th Armored Divisions crossed the border near Shazabeh, while 6 infantry divisions and 3 additional armored divisions were ordered to push roughly 80 kilometers inward toward Dezful and the Karkeh River. Along the Shat al-Arab, T-62 tanks moved across open mud flats, supported by self-propelled artillery and Mi-8 helicopters. In the north, Iraqi forces pushed through Qasr-e-Shirin and Meran, advancing into the valleys east of the Zagros Mountains. Baghdad expected the Arab population in Khuzestan to rise in support, but that did not happen. Most local residents either remained loyal to Iran or feared the brutality of the invading forces. In the early days, Iraqi troops captured several border outposts and small towns, yet they also encountered stronger resistance than anticipated. Iran's Revolutionary Guard units quickly organized defensive actions, destroying bridges and cutting roads, forcing Iraqi armored columns to halt, while engineers deployed pontoon bridges. In areas such as Gilan-e-Garb and Sarpol-e-Zahab, Kurdish militias and Iranian infantry used the mountainous terrain to ambush Iraqi supply convoys with anti-tank weapons and improvised mines. One of Baghdad's key objectives was the port city of Khorramshahr. On the morning of September 23rd, Iraqi armored units reached the outskirts. The city, located on the Karun River near the border, with its port facilities and oil infrastructure, quickly became the center of intense fighting. The defenders included regular army units, Revolutionary Guards, and civilian militias, both men and women, armed mostly with light weapons and a few 106mm recoilless rifles. They built barricades from burned buses, shipping containers, and sandbags across narrow streets. As Iraqi tanks entered the city, Iranian anti-tank teams attacked from above using RPGs and Molotov cocktails. The battle quickly turned into brutal urban combat, where each building became a defensive strongpoint. Iraqi forces responded with sustained artillery and mortar fire, followed by infantry assaults to clear block by block. The fighting dragged on for weeks through 3 major offensives. The first was repelled, the second seized the port but faced fierce counterattacks, and only in early November was the final defensive line broken. On November 10th, the Iraqi flag was raised over the customs building, marking the city's fall. The cost was severe, with more than 6,000 Iraqi casualties and over 3,000 Iranian dead, including soldiers and militia. Khorramshahr was left devastated, and it became known as the City of Blood, a lasting symbol of suffering in Iran's war memory. In the south of Khorramshahr, the city of Abadan quickly became isolated, yet Iraqi forces were unable to capture it. On Abadan Island, Iran's largest oil refinery continued operating under wartime conditions, serving as a critical supply source for Tehran. Iraqi forces positioned artillery along the western bank of the Karun River, maintaining constant bombardment day and night, while repeatedly attempting to construct pontoon bridges to cross the river. Most of these efforts were disrupted by Iranian commando raids. Inside the city, the defenders consisted of a Marine brigade, Revolutionary Guard units, and local militias. They sustained their position using improvised means, transporting ammunition and supplies across the river at night with wooden boats and small motorized vessels. For more than a year, Abadan held out like a besieged fortress. In September 1981, Iran launched Operation Samin ol-Ayyemi, sending special forces across the river over 2 nights to strike Iraqi artillery positions and sever supply lines. Under this pressure, Iraqi forces were forced to withdraw, abandoning equipment, and the siege of Abadan was effectively broken. As Iraqi forces pushed deeper into Iranian territory, their logistical and organizational weaknesses became increasingly apparent. Infrastructure in Khuzestan had been systematically destroyed, with bridges demolished and river levees breached, flooding large areas and slowing movement. The destruction of the key bridge at Sut-e-Jarahi forced armored units to take long detours through unstable terrain, while supply convoys had to navigate narrow roads lined with mines and ambush threats. Coordination between Iraqi air and ground forces was also ineffective, with air support rarely arriving at critical moments. Meanwhile, Iran gradually stabilized after the initial chaos and began reorganizing its military structure. Younger officers replaced the purged leadership, many of them in their early 20s, bringing adaptability and determination. Commanders such as Valiola Falahi and Esmail Falahi played key roles in restructuring mechanized units and coordinating operations with the Revolutionary Guard. At the same time, the government launched a nationwide mobilization under the banner of defending the homeland, encouraging civilians to join the Basij, a volunteer force rooted in religious motivation. Many teenagers received minimal training before being sent to the front, often carrying symbolic plastic keys said to represent entry to paradise, an image that would later become associated with the controversial human wave tactics of Iran. By the winter of 1980 to 1981, the front lines had largely stabilized. Iraq controlled roughly 20,000 square kilometers of territory in western Iran, but was unable to advance further. Harsh winter conditions reduced the effectiveness of mechanized units, while Iranian resistance continued to strengthen. In January 1981, near Sarpol-e-Zahab, Iranian forces launched a localized counterattack, pushing back an Iraqi brigade and reclaiming a strategic high ground. In the north, Kurdish fighters intensified guerrilla operations against Iraqi supply convoys, forcing Saddam to disperse his forces. Some elite Iraqi units became trapped in mountainous terrain filled with minefields and were forced to withdraw to avoid heavy losses. By late 1981, Iran launched its first large-scale counteroffensive, Operation Tariq al-Quds, aimed at liberating Bostan and pushing Iraqi forces west of the Karkay River. More than 30,000 troops, including Revolutionary Guard and regular army units, advanced in 3 coordinated axes. They employed refurbished T-54 and M-47 tanks, supported by 155mm artillery. The battle lasted 2 days, with Iraqi forces resisting using T-62 tanks and fortified machine gun positions. However, Iranian special units infiltrated behind the lines, cutting supply routes and fragmenting Iraqi defenses. On November 29th, Bostan was liberated. Iranian forces captured dozens of tanks and artillery pieces, regaining the initiative on the battlefield. The operation not only marked a military success, but also a psychological turning point, demonstrating that Iraq was not an unbeatable opponent. In March 1982, Iran launched Operation Fath ol-Mobin in Khuzestan with the objective of breaking the siege around Dezful and striking the southern flank of Iraqi forces. Iranian units were organized into multiple brigades and launched a surprise 3-pronged attack against an Iraqi pocket near Shush. During the night, regular army units advanced with artillery and armored support in a frontal assault, while Revolutionary Guard and Basij forces maneuvered through marshlands to strike from the rear. Iranian artillery concentrated fire on Iraqi command centers, disrupting coordination. Instead of engaging head-on, Iran applied a strategy of encirclement, isolation, and destruction of enemy units. After a week of fighting, more than 2 Iraqi divisions were cut off. Many units, short of food and ammunition, were forced to fight their way westward to escape. Nearly 30,000 Iraqi soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. The victory created momentum for the next objective, the liberation of Khorramshahr. In late April 1982, Iran launched Operation Bait-ul-Muqaddas on a larger scale with a clearer strategic aim. The objective was not only to retake Khorramshahr, but also to push Iraqi forces off the eastern bank of the Karun River. The offensive began with a bold night river crossing. Thousands of Iranian troops swam or used pontoon bridges to cross under flares and defensive fire. After securing a bridgehead, Iranian forces advanced westward, capturing Susangurd and cutting the road linking Basra to Khorramshahr. Iraqi forces responded with heavy counterattacks, deploying T-72 tanks and Gazelle helicopters equipped with hot anti-tank missiles. Iran countered with 130mm artillery and BM-21 rocket systems, maintaining sustained pressure across the front. Fighting continued for weeks in a grinding stalemate. On May 24th, Iranian forces entered Khorramshahr from 3 directions, forcing the remaining Iraqi units into fragmented resistance. By the end of the battle, more than 12,000 Iraqi soldiers had been captured, and hundreds of tanks were abandoned. The recapture of Khorramshahr eliminated Iraq's presence on Iranian territory and dealt a severe blow to Saddam Hussein's credibility. At the same time, it forced Tehran to make a strategic decision: stop the war or carry it forward. The decision came quickly. Supreme Leader Khomeini and Iran's leadership chose to continue the war, aiming to push into Iraqi territory and overthrow Saddam Hussein. In July 1982, Iran launched Operation Ramadan, one of the largest offensives in the Middle East since World War II, involving between 100,000 and 150,000 troops. The assaults were conducted in successive waves. Young Basij fighters often led the advance, moving directly into fortified defensive lines under the light of the Ramadan moon. They crossed barbed wire and minefields while shouting religious slogans, creating scenes that were both intense and deeply controversial. Iraq had prepared a layered defensive system with trenches, dense minefields, concrete fortifications, and well-positioned artillery. Iraqi artillery fire was continuous, disrupting Iranian supply lines and slowing the offensive. After nearly 2 weeks of fighting, Iran managed to capture only limited objectives such as the Fish Bridge, but failed to break through the defensive lines protecting Basra. Casualties on both sides were heavy, though Iranian losses were significantly higher. In early 1983, Iran launched Operation Wal-Fajr, one to push Iraqi forces out of positions around Hojaiya, but the results were limited and losses remained high. Subsequent operations, including Wal-Fajr 2, 3, and 4, were carried out in the mountainous Kurdistan region, often in coordination with Peshmerga guerrilla forces. In the autumn of 1983, Iranian troops advanced into areas such as Haji Umran and Penjwin, capturing several high points but facing intense Iraqi artillery and airstrikes. Under increasing pressure, Iraq began using chemical weapons on a large scale. Shells containing mustard gas and sarin caused severe casualties among both soldiers and civilians. The international response remained limited. Although condemned, no effective sanctions were imposed. This lack of consequences led Saddam Hussein to conclude that chemical weapons could be used without immediate serious repercussions. In 1984, the war entered a new phase as both sides began targeting major cities directly, opening what became known as the War of the Cities. Unable to achieve a decisive breakthrough on the ground, Iraq turned to Scud-B ballistic missiles to strike Iranian cities such as Tehran, Dezful, and Khorramabad. Although these missiles were inaccurate, when they hit densely populated areas, they created a powerful psychological effect, spreading fear across urban centers. Under that pressure, Iran moved quickly to respond in kind. It began deploying Hwasong-5 missiles supplied by North Korea, targeting Basra, Baghdad, and Mosul, effectively extending the war into Iraq's rear areas. These exchanges came in waves lasting weeks, forcing civilians in both countries to live under constant threat. Shelters were dug across cities, and in Tehran, schools moved underground, where children studied wearing protective helmets while air raid sirens echoed above. At the same time, a new front opened in the Persian Gulf. Seeking to cut off Iran's primary source of revenue, Iraq began attacking oil tankers and port facilities. Iraqi aircraft, particularly Mirage F-1EQs armed with Exocet missiles, repeatedly struck Iranian tankers and even foreign vessels approaching Bandar Karg. In response, Iran expanded its retaliation. It targeted ships belonging to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, countries providing financial support to Iraq, and laid naval mines in the Strait of Hormuz to disrupt maritime traffic. From 1984 to 1988, more than 400 commercial vessels were damaged or sunk by missiles, bombs, and mines. Insurance rates surged, shipping declined, and these escalating attacks raised serious concerns among major powers, especially the United States and the Soviet Union, over the security of global oil supplies. By 1986, Iran shifted to a more aggressive strategy with Operation Walfajr 8, aimed at capturing the Al-Faw Peninsula, a key position controlling Iraq's access to the sea. On the night of February 8, 1986, under harsh weather conditions, thousands of Iranian commandos crossed icy waters in silence, using close combat weapons to eliminate Iraqi outposts. Within hours, they established pontoon bridges and brought in tanks and artillery, catching Iraqi defenses off guard. By the following morning, Al-Faw had fallen to Iran. Iraq launched repeated counterattacks over the next 2 years, using artillery, armored forces, and chemical weapons. But Iran held its positions by fortifying the area with dense defensive works and minefields. The loss of Al-Faw shocked Baghdad, prompting Saddam Hussein to demand increased military support from abroad. From that point on, the peninsula became a key strategic bargaining point. Throughout 1986 and 1987, fighting intensified. Iran launched Operations Walfajr 9 and 10 in the Kurdistan region, coordinating with Peshmerga forces to pressure Iraq, but faced strong counterattacks from Iraqi artillery and air power. At the same time, Iraq expanded its missile and naval attacks. In September 1986, it introduced the Al-Hussein missile, a longer-range variant of the Scud, to strike deeper into enemy territory. The conflict soon drew in external powers. In that same year, an Iraqi aircraft mistakenly fired 2 Exocet missiles at the U.S. destroyer USS Stark, killing 37 American sailors. The incident provoked a strong response from Washington, but rather than disengaging, the United States increased its military presence to protect oil shipping routes. In July 1987, Operation Earnest Will was launched, with Kuwaiti oil tankers reflagged under the U.S. flag and escorted by American warships through the Persian Gulf. Iran viewed this as direct intervention and responded by deploying mines and conducting fast boat attacks. A mine strike damaged the USS Samuel B. Roberts, which led to Operation Praying Mantis in April 1988, during which U.S. naval forces destroyed Iranian oil platforms and several naval vessels. By this point, the Iran-Iraq War had evolved beyond a regional conflict into an international flashpoint, where the strategic interests of major powers directly collided on the same battlefield. In January 1987, Iran launched Operation Karbala 5, its final major attempt to capture Basra. After intense preparatory bombardment, around 200,000 troops, supported by hundreds of tanks, advanced through the Shalamche area, a marshland heavily seeded with mines and traps. This time, Iran applied lessons from earlier failures, using engineers to clear paths, dig anti-mine trenches, and construct more stable pontoon bridges for armored units. In the early phase, Iranian forces managed to break through the first defensive line and advance several kilometers. However, Iraq had prepared a layered defensive system known as a kill zone, with 155mm artillery, Grad rocket launchers, and dense positions of ZSU-23 anti-aircraft guns. As Iranian units pushed forward, they came under devastating fire from multiple directions. Iraq reinforced its defense with Me-24 attack helicopters and Su-25 ground attack aircraft, striking Iranian formations from the air. At the same time, the use of chemical weapons, including mustard gas and tabun, intensified, causing severe casualties as many Iranian soldiers suffered respiratory burns and were rendered combat ineffective. After days of fighting, the offensive stalled. Both sides suffered tens of thousands of casualties. Although Iran failed to capture Basra, the operation demonstrated its continued ability to coordinate large-scale offensives, albeit at a heavy cost. At the same time, the War of the Cities resumed with greater intensity. In February 1987, Iraq began launching dozens of Scud missiles into Tehran each day, aiming to spread panic and pressure the Iranian government. Civilians in the capital lived under constant fear, and many families sent their children to rural areas to escape the attacks. In response, Iran intensified its missile strikes, deploying Hwasong-5 and Hwasong-6 missiles against Baghdad, Basra, and Mosul. These exchanges continued into the spring of 1988, killing thousands of civilians. In just 1 week in early March 1988, more than 50 missiles struck Tehran. One hit a bus terminal, killing over 60 people. Images of destroyed buildings and injured children spread widely, fueling calls for peace. Yet the fighting continued. In March 1988, one of the most horrific events of the war occurred in Halabja, a Kurdish town. After Iranian forces and Peshmerga fighters captured the area and threatened the key highway linking Baghdad to Kirkuk, Iraq responded with chemical weapons. Bombs and artillery shells carrying mustard gas, sarin, and tabun were deployed, releasing toxic clouds over civilian areas. Within minutes, thousands of residents who could not escape collapsed. An estimated 5,000 people, mostly women and children, were killed, and thousands more were severely injured. Images of bodies lying in the streets shocked the world, but the international response remained limited. At the United Nations, major powers condemned the attack, yet no strict sanctions were imposed, largely due to geopolitical considerations. By the spring of 1988, Iraq launched a decisive counteroffensive. With support from the Soviet Union and France, Iraqi forces had been re-equipped with T-72 tanks, 152mm artillery, and more advanced missiles. Saddam Hussein also strengthened the Republican Guard, elite units that were better trained, better equipped, and highly loyal. In April, Iraq launched Operation Tawakkalna ala Allah, concentrating overwhelming firepower against the Al-Faw Peninsula. Massive artillery barrages and cluster bombs struck Iranian positions, followed by mechanized units crossing minefields using armored vehicles equipped with plows. Within 36 hours, Iraqi forces recaptured the peninsula, raising their flag along the coast. Iran lost Al-Faw, one of its most important strategic gains, in just 2 days. The momentum continued. In May and June, Iraq retook Majnoon and pushed Iranian forces back eastward. By July, Iraqi troops advanced into Iranian territory, capturing several towns in Kurdistan and once again threatening Avaz. Iranian forces, exhausted, short on ammunition, and with declining morale, were no longer able to mount effective counterattacks. At the same time, at sea, U.S. naval forces continued to engage Iranian units, sinking several small warships in a series of confrontations. In the air, a tragic incident occurred on July 3, 1988, when Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian Airbus carrying 290 passengers, was mistakenly shot down by the USS Vincennes. All aboard were killed. The incident shocked Iran. Public anger surged across the country, but it also forced the leadership to confront a hard reality. The war had gone too far. In the end, after 8 years of exhausting war, Ayatollah Khomeini announced that Iran would accept United Nations Security Council Resolution 598 on July 18, 1988, a decision he described as like drinking a cup of poison, yet necessary to prevent the country from collapsing into total destruction. 6 days later, Iraq also agreed to a ceasefire, and from August 20th, 1988, the guns gradually fell silent across the entire front. Civilians began returning to the border regions, but what awaited them was not recovery, but fields filled with landmines, barbed wire, and shattered cities such as Khorramshahr and Susangerd. The war left a staggering toll, with an estimated 500,000 to 1 million people killed or wounded, hundreds of thousands permanently disabled by mines and chemical weapons, and more than 2 million displaced from their homes. That devastation quickly spread into the economic foundations of both countries. Iran lost a significant portion of its oil revenue as infrastructure was destroyed, while Iraq accumulated more than $80 billion in debt, a burden that would later become a direct cause of its invasion of Kuwait in 1990. Out of these losses, the regional balance of power shifted. Iraq emerged with a large and battle-hardened military, but at the cost of a collapsing economy, while Iran, despite failing to overthrow Saddam, succeeded in consolidating its regime and building the Revolutionary Guard into a long-term force of influence. At the same time, Gulf states grew increasingly dependent on the United States, and from this point forward, the American presence in the Persian Gulf became a lasting strategic reality. At the societal level, the consequences ran even deeper. Hundreds of thousands of veterans returned home with lifelong injuries. Millions of families lost loved ones, and an entire generation grew up shaped by war. The images of chemical weapons, trench warfare, and grinding attrition did not disappear when the fighting stopped, but lingered in memory for years to come. Looking back, the war produced almost no meaningful gains for either side. There was no decisive victory, no significant territorial change, only a prolonged and devastating conflict marked by immense loss. In many ways, it resembled a smaller version of World War I in the Middle East, where belief, pride, and fear drove both sides into a cycle they could not escape. And when it finally ended, what remained was not victory, but a heavy legacy of loss, debt, and wounds that would never fully heal.